Welcome to Entwined, the Constellation Chronicles, the podcast where we dive deep into the intricate web of family constellations and the profound stories that shape our lives. I'm your host, Alexis Gonzalez. I'm an author, speaker, and family constellations facilitator. In each episode, we'll be speaking with facilitators and thought leaders who explore the dynamic relationships that connect us all. Together, we'll uncover the hidden patterns, transformative experiences, and rich insights that family constellations reveals. Thank you for joining us on this journey as we explore the entwined stories of our past, the present moments we share, and the futures we're creating together. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about family constellations, then you'll love my free ebook, Interwoven Paths. You can find this ebook on my website at www.vibratecreate.com, or you can also visit the link in the description below. Welcome to our latest episode. I'm so excited to introduce you to Dr. Larry Honig, today's guest. He's a renowned psychologist with over 2 decades of experience helping individuals overcome emotional and psychological challenges. With a unique blend of modern science and ancient healing traditions, Dr. Honig offers a comprehensive approach to healing that addresses the complex web of factors contributing to our well-being. Dr. Honig joins us to share his expertise in family dynamics, emotional healing, and the lasting impact of trauma on individuals and families. Let's dive into the conversation and explore the possibilities of holistic healing with Dr. Larry Honig. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Entwined, the Constellation Chronicles. My name is Alexis Gonzalez. So today I have a guest named Larry Honig, who is practicing currently in New Zealand. And I would like to switch it over to you so that you can share with everyone kind of what your background is in this work. So go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. So here in New Zealand, we say kia ora, which is for hello, but it also has a connotation of well-being. And I have lived in New Zealand for 10 and a half years. I am a clinical psychologist. I first learned constellations in 2018 and 2019 and did a foundational training with Aaron Lewis here in New Zealand. And then I recently, in May this year, completed a 15-month alchemical constellations facilitator training and certification with Dan Cohen and Emily Bluefield of Seeing with Your Heart. As far as being a psychologist, currently I mostly work with victims of childhood sexual abuse, and I also work with some other things, general psychological issues, and totally different from constellations. I do a kind of brainwave biofeedback called LENS, low energy neurofeedback system, that has results for ADHD, traumatic brain injury, and anything else the brain does, which of course is lots of things. I first encountered constellations just over 20 years ago. I went to a doctoral program to finish my training in becoming a psychologist. It was Saybrook Graduate School at the time. It's now Saybrook University, and it was an at-a-distance program. We worked from home and then had 2 residential weeks. And during one of the residential weeks, Dan Cohen stood up during dinner and said, well, this evening we have this optional activity. I'm doing a family constellation. Anyone want to come? And I had never heard of it before. And I just showed up, and we had a room full of, probably at least 30 people. And he already had 2 clients set up that would receive constellations. And I jumped right in, and I represented some quite powerful elements of their history. One of them was an ancestor who had been a Nazi soldier. The other was an ancestor that had been a white slave owner in the South of the United States. And I remember the moment after when someone said, oh, that must have been so hard for you. I said, no, I was representing. I didn't become those people. I didn't take on their guilt. I got it right away what it means to stand in the field and represent, and how you are still yourself and you're observing it, but you're receiving information and so on. As far as my career, where I'm going now is I want to really expand doing constellations.
Yeah, so I think the thing I'm most interested in learning is because I feel like sometimes in this more scientific or rigid kind of idea space, it's not as accepted um, that there is spirituality to it. Does that make sense? And
Yes, absolutely makes sense.
I know in the email you sent me, you talked about consciousness, and that was something I was extremely like vigilant, wanting to figure out what is me, who am I, where did I come from, what happens after we pass away, do we just end and never again, are we a thing? So that took me on to like a huge, like 9 year journey into the fields of metaphysics and spirituality. And so I came across like psychics and mediums and shamans and just a whole, and also like religion. So I'm very interested in how that transition was for you from going from that specific field into something a little more spiritual. So yeah, I'd like to know more about that.
Great, great question. I think our journeys may have some similarities here. Um, when I first started out in graduate school for psychology, which I went right after undergraduate, I wanted I wanted to do something where we had some solid knowledge. And I was looking at all these different schools of psychotherapy, and a lot of it felt like different flavors, different opinions, like we didn't know what was truth. But interestingly, I was also already interested in consciousness. How can this physical brain, this matter, um, translate to emotion, ideas, thoughts, impulses, all the abstract? And I was not going to get that answer studying clinical neuropsychology, which is testing of cognitive function for people with things like brain damage and stroke and dementia and brain tumors and so on. And so it was quite dry. I I I put my foot in my mouth one time when was sitting next to a neuropsychologist, which I'd almost become and studied, and said neuropsychologists are the accountants of psychology. But that's a function that's necessary in the medical system to diagnose your skills and what's wrong with you and so on. And she was kind of offended, but that was that. But I was asking the bigger question of what does it mean to be a soul, have a soul in a physical body? And I even took one small course in undergraduate on theories of consciousness. And then during the time I was studying neuropsychology at University of Houston in Texas, I started exploring everything New Age and metaphysical. But it intersected with health in that I was looking at things like psychoneuroimmunology, how the brain interacts with the immune system. But what's the brain? So the mind and thoughts, and then how does that affect health? How do attitudes affect health? Um, I then was learning other things, like I learned Reiki. I did level one around that time, and I was doing different kinds of meditation. And I also always had one foot in modern traditional religion. I come from a Jewish background, and one foot in every other mystical thought system, just checking them all out. Eventually, um, six, when was that? In 1992, I became a member of the Baha'i faith. And I feel like the beliefs about life after death are well written about, well taught in that, that to me coincide perfectly with in constellation work. I don't know how anybody does it who doesn't believe the ancestors are real, that we are souls inhabiting a physical body for however many days, years we get on this earthly plane, and then we exist as an independent collection of intelligence, of personality, so to speak, if internally. And that's what we're tapping into when we do constellations. So, so I started in neuropsychology, and then later I I had left that, and later when I went back to graduate school, I got to study things like consciousness and mind-body health and progressive kinds of I learned a kind of therapy with colored light called emotional transformation therapy. So that's not just working on the cognitive, which it does, but on your whole energetic system. So when you look at color coming at you from a full spectrum light source, LED light source, it's going to affect your whole auric system, your whole biofield, at the same time that you're looking at your memories and your thoughts. And so it's
So
doing
you
these
were just
accelerated things. And so when I found constellations, it was just like it was for Bert Hellinger, this perfect mix, or he created this perfect mix of psychological principles and and something more, the beyond.
so you
And
get to
yeah.
see like experiments or seeing experiences. I'm very interested in this color thing. I used to
Oh
work at
yeah.
this spiritual store where they had like colored sunglasses,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
never tried them, but did you get to see results that that's like a thing that really affects people?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
what?
It's called ATT. It was created by Dr. Stephen Vasquez, a counseling psychologist in Texas. And I just told someone the other day who had a session. I think it was their first session on the light machine. If this takes for someone, it's like 10 sessions of talking, no matter what modality you're using, but talking in 1 hour. It strips away people's defenses. It puts them in a hypnotic, altered state. Sometimes we use flashing, which entrains the brain waves, can put you in a meditative state to go into your past, or relaxing you, or faster rates put you in a more attentive, present state. And and so there's this whole added element of that. And also, a person is not looking at the therapist. So there's whole schools of therapy that's all about the relationship between the therapist and the client. Humanistic psychology is that's foundational to it. This, you're there, but you're next to them, guiding them. They're really looking into their own psyche. They're talking to themselves, but you're helping them, asking the right questions, taking them where they need to go, and then applying the different colors, which affect different emotions and life issues. So that's a method I've been involved with actually since 1994.
That is
And
really
it
cool.
was kind of basic then, and then now there's 5 weekends of training. And um, so I've always been after what works and what works faster. I also learned EMDR, which a lot of people might be familiar with for trauma, but I tell people that this ETT is like EMDR on steroids. But then when I think about constellations, to bring it back to that, it takes you somewhere that anything else can't take you.
Well, that's what I was just about to say is it's kind of a testament to the power of the work when you have such a big background of so many other things to know, yeah, like this is something that you really love. So can you
Right.
explain what made you really passionate about this work after you were able to see all those things beforehand?
Sure. So I was sold experiencing my first constellation. Um, I think about Dan Cohen, um, because he had been in business and then um, says he's pretty much a scientist. He recently wrote an article that I published in a physics journal about consciousness and constellations, which is quite amazing. Those worlds coming together. Um, he's always worried about the skeptics. And I decided some time ago that's not your audience. If you have to convince someone that something makes sense, well, then they need to go to someone else. And I can explain things, I can lay it all out why things make sense. But you talked about interest in religion. I'm not going to try to convince an atheist that God exists. Faith, belief is something quite mysterious. And the thing about constellations, though, if someone is willing to go and experience one, they will see things they can't explain logically. And so I was surrounded in my early training. I called it the atheist halls of medicine. I worked at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, and I was calling that slash and burn medical technology. Yeah, lots of people are alive because of chemotherapy and radiation and surgery, but it's not the core of what cancer is. And I came away from that realizing that I was much different, that I was in with a group of people believing that there's way more that we don't know and way more that the powers that be, the established systems of science have written out. If they can't see it, it's not real. Well, quantum physics blows that out of the water because they never find the last particle. Everything is information and energy. And and so science and spirituality and ancient theology, ancient beliefs about the world are coming together. And it's way different than in the 1980s when I felt like I was kind of alone, a lone wolf, even in alternative or complementary integrated medicine. And then about 10 years or 15 years ago, I went and looked at the MD Anderson Cancer Center website. And I'm like, wow, now they have a full professor, um, physician, whatever, a doctor of psychology with a whole department doing research on alternative and complementary medicine. And I wrote this little paper as an independent study on mind body medicine and things like Norman Cousins and the power of laughter and Bernie Siegel and people like that, um, or support groups where if people just talk to each other in a support group while they're going through cancer, their outcomes are better. So simple things like that. And so now there's actually resources at traditional institutions being put to it. Constellations are still on the left side of things. Most of the people I know doing this work didn't come up through traditional academic settings.
Yeah.
Some
That
are
sounds so
psycho.
excited about you because you came up in that. So
Oh yeah, yeah, I
it's
suffered
really
through
cool.
it, and I don't regret. I did. I don't regret any of it though.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's what I was about to say earlier as well, is I think it's you kind of said something along the lines of like we should be talking about constellations instead of this thing, but I think this is also part of what you do. And so because you have all this background, you can bring that into what you do with others. So I think that's really cool.
right. I was thinking about that. I do currently. I do a 1 day live group workshop um, every 2 months. And after either my last one or the one before that, I reflected on what just happened throughout the day. And I realized that every decision I make in every moment of what to do next is not just channeled intuition, which it can be, and maybe it is, but my presence is built on the fact that my sort of Monday through Friday or what have you work is psychotherapy with trauma. People have experienced trauma. And so I've got clients that have had the worst kind of torture you don't want to imagine. And so all of these skills that you have to do that, like so um helping people self-regulate, pacing the process, and then the wisdom of putting the pieces together, which is a thing that happens in psychotherapy, where you're connecting the what happened in your past that you're acting out now, even in a traditional, like Freudian sense. But what patterns are you still in? Or this whole thing about dissociating. Right now, you became that 7-year old that was afraid of your father, but you're in front of your boss who's an adult. And how do you step into some adult space with it without the baggage of the past? So I do all those things on a regular basis. And so I can't, I'm not saying that people who come from other backgrounds and then learn to do constellations are not effective. They are. I've seen that. But I know that I bring everything with me. And I don't know how I would be doing this if I found it when I was 25 years old and just jumped right into it. I can't even imagine that. It wasn't around really, not in America anyway. But no matter what you do in life, you bring everything you've done before with you.
Yeah, you said a specific word that stuck with me, which is self-regulation. And so I'm
Yes.
wondering if you could share some tools with some of the people who are watching here. What do you mean by that? And like,
Oh, sure.
any
So,
examples there?
it's easy to get anxious or scared of something. It's easy to have um, negative memories of things in the past. There's some really simple techniques. This one came from EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's an effective trauma treatment that's quite established. But the simple technique in that involves just tapping left and right after and just noticing what you notice, this whole observing, and people will calm down. Um, there's a takeaway for you right there. And there are lots of different techniques. There's something called thought, emotional freedom technique or tapping, and it's tapping on 7 different acupressure points. And so that's actually a combination of like um, a Chinese medicine, the acupressure points
Mhm.
with therapy, um, without needles. You
Just
just
very
have to tap.
recently. Yeah, very recently. My teacher has background in EFT, hypnosis, Reiki. Like she taught me all these different things. Also like dream interpretation. She's
Hmm.
quite a
Hmm.
multifaceted person. But I was going through something personally in my life, and she taught me this technique where it was like, maybe you can see if this is something you've heard of.
Hmm.
But she told me like look all the way to the left, see how far you can look. She said it has to do
Sure.
with the vagus nerve. And then
Yeah.
I think maybe your arms go up or something. And then you see how far you can look. Then you come back to center and with your arms up, you look as far as you can, like very strongly until you yawn or you take a sigh.
Mm.
And then when that happens, she says, go ahead and look again and see how much farther you can look. And when she walked me through this exercise, I realized, like, yeah, I could see farther to that side. Almost like it kind of relaxes something in the brain. It's pretty interesting going through that
Yeah,
work.
that's a new one. So you've
Yeah,
taught me one too.
yeah.
I
I'll
wonder,
ask you what
uh,
it's called.
yeah, there's something quite new. Um, oh, I'm blocking. like got three letters, DBR, something like that, that that works with the nervous system like that. It might be from this. I think it was developed in England. I know Ruth Lanius is one of the researchers in it, but so there are things like that. So you mentioned the vagus nerve. I I have been around heart math, which is heart rate variability biofeedback. That's about at least 30 years old now. And it's a you can buy the home device, and the heart math um, organization, they have a nonprofit and a for-profit. They do a lot of education about autonomic system regulation, but it's all about the heart. So, so the vagus nerve is a 12 cranial nerve, which doesn't just connect the brain to the heart and control heart rate. It connects to all different parts of the body. So the gut and so on. And increased vagal tone, so higher variability of the time in between each heartbeat equals better health, better emotional health and physical health. And that can be trained. Everything's connected. Everything's connected. So, um, back to constellations, there's I don't know how much all the participants in a constellation experience it. What people do experience is getting information. They step in to represent for someone they've never met before, usually, about someone that may not even be alive now, and then they know things. And they don't have to have any prior training. So I used to think, like when I was a child, like special people born with this unique sort of gift were psychic. And then when I was like 19, I learned it was called Silva mind control. Now it's called the Silva method. Now I think it's all downloadable online, but there were classes you went to, and you're basically doing self-hypnosis, and you were learning things like visualization, creating your life, and also healing at a distance, visualizing someone else and them being healed. And after so many days of going into this relaxed meditative, he called the alpha state, the brainwave state, um, and people can learn to do that. But with constellations, you just step right in and you say, okay, I'll represent your mother. And then you feel in, and all of a sudden you're like that. And they go, that's exactly how she used to always be. And I had an experience as a client in a group constellation, and I didn't know anybody in the room. And somebody represented my mother, and immediately they said, I have all this pain in my arm. My mother had broken her arm and had surgery and had a metal plate put in just like a month earlier, and she was 10,000 miles away. And so we witnessed these phenomena that, but what I don't know is how much people feel like they went into some altered state. It's simpler than that. But when I facilitate, for me, that's a whole different state that I only feel like I use partially when I have my psychologist hat on. And one of the big differences for me, I realized, is I have a lot of clients that need long-term therapy. They're going on 6 years or what have you. They've been really broken, and they have psychiatric illness and take medicine and so on. They've been in the hospital, that level. And I get to hold their story. And I remember one time recently, the client, well, she'd been coming just 2 years, and I said, "Well, this happened for you, like something she told me a year earlier." She said, "How do you remember that?" Because she herself did not remember telling me. And I said, "Well, that's my job. If I didn't have a good memory for people, the facts of people's life, I'd be writing a lot of notes because that's my job. So I have to hold their story." And in a way, that's a fine balance for any kind of therapist, not to be too attached to it that it wears you down.
Mhm.
It's easy to have vicarious trauma, and you have to do self-care and take care of yourself. And if you're a person that absorbs too much, it may be the wrong profession. But with constellations, remember in my first training, Aaron Lewis said, if you come to me in a constellation and then 4 months later you come again, I won't remember what we did 4 months ago. And it won't matter because there's a quote, you never step into the same river twice.
Yes, yes, I know this one.
So, so in that moment, you're working with what's up right now. Now, if a person wants to say, well, this is what I got out of that, and this is what I worked on, and now I'm going doing chapter 2 or 3 or whatever of this healing process, that's fine. Or you just start fresh. And so I've had some repeat customers, and I do kind of remember their story, but not in detail. And it's something I like about this is that I don't have to carry it at all because most of the time people are doing it as a what they say one-off, a one-time um, intervention,
Have you
healing
noticed
session.
differences in the resolution of some of these things in constellations versus the other stuff that you've done?
It's just faster. And also, what gets revealed can't be found like any other way. I mean, someone might go to someone particularly gifted, like psychic, and get a reading and that sort of thing. And they'll say, well, I know this about your ancestry or whatever. And okay, fine. That's possible. But that's what happens in constellations is you say, this thing keeps happening to me and I don't know why. And I've done this and this therapy, or I've tried this and nothing makes it change. And then you step back into the generations and you say, this person experienced this. It could be 1,000 years ago. And you'll never necessarily be able to prove it. That's not the point. You don't have to take this to a court of law and say this really happened or that person really lived. I don't decide whether it's just symbolic or it really happened, but you uncover that thing that you're entangled with and is blocking you. And so it's revealed. And then you have a way to move it and repair and restore balance to it. And I don't see that happening like that in like weekly therapy, even advanced methods that I use.
Yeah, and it's not even just like I want to share an example of something.
Please do.
So there was someone who came in and I believe there was like a family secret that nobody knew about. I think it might have been like an abortion before her. And so this child of the mother, and nobody had ever talked about it, although she was carrying this in her DNA and it was affecting her life now. But it comes up in the constellation, is kind of revealed. And she goes back and asks, is this something that happened either to you or to my grandma or whatever in the family? And then the mother says, I've never told anybody that, but this thing happened. So sometimes it is that something is revealed and it's verifiable, where you can go back and see that this thing actually really did happen. Um, and I know for myself, a lot of my training was like personal work. And I think you even said in the email, working on your own entanglements and blind spots is so important when you're wanting to be a facilitator. So that was most of my training. But
Yeah,
I'm bringing that up because I'm saying I noticed so much of what I carry. I was unconsciously living out things that were from my ancestors, my parents or my grandparents. And then
absolutely.
the more I ask questions, I'm like, that makes so much sense why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. So, have you personally in your own life had some of these kind of awarenesses within
Oh,
your
absolutely.
why you live?
So there's some big kinds of issues that no one can escape this affecting them. And it's simple. It doesn't mean it's trauma. I was adopted at birth. So it was prearranged before I was born. But this was in 1965. Yeah, you can do the math. You can decide how old I am. Um, in those days, everything was secret adoptions. And so I did eventually, in my 20s, I met my biological mother and I know her. But that's a situation that's not natural. There can be no harmony ultimately, no matter how well-intentioned and well-meaning, and especially this whole basically ripped from the mother that bore you, whose DNA you carry, to the one that's going to raise you. No matter how joyful and, and safe and so on your adoptive parents start out as, this happened. And so I've done constellations around that. Um, there was a moment, so I've done constellations. When I did the 15-month alchemical training, um, we did a lot of work on ourselves, small breakout groups. We were meeting 2.5 hours a week on Zoom. It started with about 40 people in your group. And so did a lot of breakout rooms, all kinds of processes. And then you could get longer constellations. Also, they had a whole team of people that you'd sign up for, like a 1 hour, 2 hour constellation. So I've done all this deep work. And what happened for me is I got to a point, we had this big constellation at our residential 4-day retreat at the end of the whole the whole 15 months. And someone had this story. There were about 40 40 or 50 of us in the room. And then so multiple things actually went on. It's kind of the magic that the Seeing with Your Heart people do. It's a bit of a free-for-all circus, but they're monitoring it. And everybody was a trained facilitator, so we could have these little breakouts. So there were this thing about someone had died in a mine when there was child labor and all these, and then it was something about the earth and raping the earth and all those elements of that with mining. But there then popped up like five people who'd all had some kind of like similar to the ancestor that was an orphan. Um, and in the moment, they're experiencing that feeling orphaned. I don't belong. Nobody loves me. I don't have parents, etc. And I didn't know each of those people's stories. And I was watching that. And all of a sudden, with other things I had done, I got this insight or that where I was at, I was beyond that story. And it doesn't matter ultimately the conditions under which you were born. There are people who are the product of rapes. And as horrifying as that is, and how much damage that would cause a psyche, ultimately there's a transcendent place where you belong in the world. You were not created just by your physical mother and father. You're created by life itself, by your creator, however you term that. And so I looked at these four people that were crying, and then other people were assisting them to move through that. And I said, there is no story. And then one person just said, yes, there is. And, because they were still in the wounded 3-year-old who didn't have a mother or something. And and that's fine. That's the stage they were at. But I'd done this work where it was like, that didn't matter anymore. And, and you get beyond the judgment of right and wrong. We know on one level what's morally right and wrong, what's harmful, what's not harmful, how we should behave, and so on, no matter what you believe and what system you come from. Um, but there's a place where that becomes story, and you as a soul just belongs to life itself. And then you have the freedom because that feeling like you don't belong is quite a block to life. And I know that those people were going to get through that process. And maybe this is the first time they even encountered feeling this or recognizing that they felt alone, they felt abandoned, and so on.
So when you were growing up, before you started any of this healing work, um, Is that something you experienced? Did you know that you were adopted?
Oh yeah, I always knew.
You knew.
So
Did
I
you
was
have
actually,
this feeling?
yeah, I always knew. My brother and sister and I were all adopted, and and my brother's quite close in age to me. He's 7 months. We're from different biological parents. We're only 7 months apart. So I always knew. It was just like before I knew how babies were made, I knew that I didn't come from my mommy's tummy. I had this weird image that they went to the baby store and there were like 16 cribs in a 4x4 grid and they walked up and down and shopped and then paid a bunch of money to choose me. I had no idea like how it had really happened. But um so I always knew, and I didn't know that other adopted people that it was kept a secret. I couldn't even fathom that. Remember when I was about 15, they used to have this thing called ABC after school specials and these movies for children on like, I don't know, Wednesday afternoons or something after school. And it was about a teenager who's like 15 or 16 and all of a sudden finds out that she was actually adopted. And I was just like, how can that be? And how horrible that would be. Like your life's a lie kind of thing. And that's what shame and all this social constraint and judgments that things are wrong and bad does to people, that they think they have to keep something a secret like that. I think society's a lot past that. Now there's a lot of real open adoption. So, but the adopted thing really hit me when I met my biological mother and I realized how much of my temperament and personality traits, my IQ, things like that, were the same as hers.
Yeah,
Different but the same.
yeah.
And I could have never, in the in the best adoptive family, gotten that because you don't have their DNA. And love is something beyond that. And how you relate to people is beyond that. But everyone else has that. Or everyone that's not adopted, that's raised by the people that sired them, has that resonance already. And there's always going to be a bit of like odd one out feeling,
That is,
even if, and you might randomly have things in common, but then when you realize, wait a minute, I really don't have that much. Like we're not interested in the same things. We don't have the same kind of life path. And and don't resonate. There's this kind of subtle energetic thing of people that are biologically related have some kind of similarity, even though lots of families really fight and don't get along and the siblings are quite different, there's still something there that they're sharing DNA.
so this reminds me of a study. I don't know if you've heard, there were like twins that were separated at
Oh,
birth,
yes,
and then much later in life, they come together and realize they're living such similar
right,
lives. Yeah.
right. So had they been raised together, they would have been trying to be individuals a bit. And they would have said, "Oh, well, they like to dance. I'm going to go sing or, whatever. Like, I'm going to be different." And they would make themselves be different. And, but if they weren't raised together, they didn't know anything about that. And so they just followed their sort of template, their blueprint, their DNA blueprint. And then when they were together, they were indistinguishable. I guess we're talking about identical twins. Because then they share the exact DNA. And so that's that whole nature versus nurture thing that um, you can't avoid some kinds of situations that cause ripples, and they're things you need to cope with in life. But everybody has something. And I just see constellations as a way of moving that around and restoring balance and stepping out of the judgment of the story. Bert Hellinger was really clear that he would see the most horrible perpetrations that have happened in families and in history. And but he wasn't about judging right and wrong. And he had a quite transcendent view of all of that. And he was looking more at the constellation principles. And there's some more complicated stuff about the victim perpetrator bond. And he did a real seminal piece there in Germany with descendants of Holocaust survivors and descendants of Nazis and what it took to move past that. It's quite kind of monumental to think that it can be done. And but it's not in the religious sense of like, I'll forgive you because I'm supposed to, because I'm doing the good thing. It's an actual stepping back into that approach of you just observe what is without judgment and you accept what is as it is. That was one of the phrases my first instructor, facilitator, trainer would say, accepting what is as it is.
I know that you said you, in your clinical practice, have worked with quite a few sexual trauma survivors. Um, I know that in this work, this is it's pretty interesting because I was thinking of this yesterday actually. Um, in this work, we include anybody who's excluded. And what
Right.
no teacher of Constellations has shared with me is sometimes the perpetrator victim bond can be even more strong than the mother child bond because you guys
Yes.
are kind of in each other's family systems now. So
Yes.
when for anybody who doesn't know what constellations is, what the purpose of this work is to include anybody who's excluded. And sometimes the natural human response is to immediately exclude somebody who does something like that. And what we're doing is bringing them back into the family with love. And then in that way, we don't perpetuate this pattern or habit that keeps getting passed on. So I'm curious about with you because you have experience with these kinds of victims. How has this work changed how you approach these kinds of?
So the first thing I want to say about what you just said, you have to meet the client, the seeker, where they're at. And the main thing is safety. So, yes, there's the fundamental principle of inclusion, but if you've got a room and you are actually having a rep for the perpetrator, they may not feel safe unless that person is almost all the way on the other side of the room near the door.
Right,
Or you bring in a rep for protection and you put people behind them or next to them and or you put some kind of object. I've done the tabletop constellations one-on-one where I just put something. I folded like a piece of paper and put it between them and the perpetrator. They they fundamentally have to feel safe. And the goal might not be that harmonious order, especially if the perpetrator was like a parent. So in the normal, like healthy, ideal system, you've got the person, the parents, the grandparents, the great grandparents, and everyone's in a line and they're close. And that may never come to be for them. I did a big group a group constellation. There was a New Zealand trauma conference of all kinds of um, people involved in like healthcare, healing of trauma. I think also families and victims were there. Maybe some people in the criminal justice system and so on. Just anyone was able to come, and there are 380 people at this conference. And I did one of the smaller sessions. There were 50 people there, and actually it was quite interesting. I started out asking who has heard of family constellations before. I think one or two people out of the 50 had ever even heard of it.
yeah,
This was in Christchurch in the South Island of New Zealand, which is the third largest city in New Zealand. Well, it's, I don't know, 200,000 people or less or something. But anyway, it's still a metropolitan area. And these were all a lot of highly trained health professionals of all different types. So what I set up was what I call a macro constellation about something in society. And I had 9 different things represented, but I picked two reps for each of those 9 things, like the doctors, the therapists, the the abuse survivor, the perpetrator, and one was blocks in the way of um, effective healing moving forward in society. And that the government, because they fund, we have socialized medicine, so they fund treatment for for sexual abuse and so on. So I had all these elements, and then all this, like in the middle of it, and I'm going around and getting reports from all the different reps. And then one of the ones that represented the perpetrator said, "What about me? I feel like I'm being ignored."
Mm.
And so I stopped that. I used that as a teaching moment to tell everyone in the room the principle. And I'd already done the first half of the lecture was what is constellations and the philosophical background of it and so on, the history of it. And so I'd already done that, but I reminded everyone belongs. And I didn't move the perpetrator closer to the victim or anything like that, but I pointed that out. And then we all were then giving that attention to the perpetrator also. And you can't deny the existence of it. And and because it wasn't a personal constellation, the people representing survivors of abuse, I didn't ask them, but they probably hadn't experienced that themselves. So we were doing this generic kind of thing. Had it been had the actual person who'd experienced abuse, then I would have had to see like how does it affect them to to allow that into the space and where do they need to stand to be okay with that? To
Yeah.
be okay with the fact that this happened no matter what it caused them, no matter what pain they're in, no matter what symptoms they have of PTSD and so on, no matter how wrecked their life may or may not have been. But that was an important moment where the perpetrator, without me coaching them, said, "Wait a minute, I belong here." Because that's just a fundamental reality.
Yeah. And I recently had an experience in Alaska when I was teaching there and did a constellation. Um, for me, a lot of my work is very intuitive because of my background in trainings and like psychism and mediumship and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, as I was facilitating, I was told keep this person blind, and it was the perpetrator. And that was for the purpose of allowing the client to stay in her body and
Right.
to be
Can
able
we
to
explain to the audience here, when
yeah,
you say blind, you're putting some rep down, but you're not telling anyone what it's representing.
right. Yeah, yeah. So just allowing it to come in.
So no one knows what's going to come up there.
Yeah, and there's actually facilitators who do everything blind, so nobody knows what the issue is, who the people are representing, and it's still
Right.
working.
And
But
there's even a double blind where even the facilitator just puts placeholders down and then later finds out what is this.
exactly. Yeah,
Very mysterious.
yeah,
So you were saying that you kept the perpetrator blind so that
right.
nobody would immediately recoil from it,
Well, it was
kind
more for
of.
the safety of the client. So that's why I love so much
Right.
you brought
Safety
that up
defined.
is because for me, it's always put the client first and keep them in
Absolutely.
and present so they can take this in and don't just completely put up a wall. And also just being so gentle with something so big, right? And so I love that you were sharing that is to make sure it's safe for whoever is
Absolutely.
in whatever
If
way.
there's
And I didn't think about this is what's going to make her safe. It was just something I received. It was like, keep it this
right.
way because it will stay safer for her this way. And it was such a beautiful release for her in the moment of safety to feel these things. So, and yeah, I do think it's very important. The last person I spoke with was Gary Stewart, who's a facilitator, and he was also talking about the perpetrators, and he was saying how even them, it didn't start with them. Ancestrally, they're fallen,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
I always put it farther back. And even if I don't actually represent their parents' parents, so on, I take, I don't know, an object and or something and then say, let's give it back. And and I just move it up the line. And When I do it in my office, we're in front of a window with a windowsill. So so when I put I have the burden has gone from the client to to the the perpetrator, um, or to whoever. I then move it up, and then it's sort of out of the field if I just kind of place it on the edge of the windowsill. And you just give it back all the way, as they say, to source. Like, where did it start? And that's another thing about we've just been talking about looking at the trauma, but what about the resolution?
Mhm.
So one thing I got real strong, like teaching in this 15-month program, is about the sort of alchemical, or I don't know, hate to use the word magical, but this thing that happens if you go back far enough. So so we all come from, the first humans 100,000 years ago, and even if you just look at recorded history of, I don't know, 10 and 15,000 years, and if you go back far enough, you'll get to at least one community or civilization that was in harmony somewhere. And people often don't go back far enough. So if you're like saying, well, I'm Irish and my grandparents immigrated here from Ireland, and so then they're identified like they were forever Irish. But actually, if you go back 10 and 20,000 years, they were in Africa. They were with Lucy and in Kenya, what have you. So we're all coming from that same seed. If you go back far enough, you're past this ethnic group that got formed, and you're past all these wars, all these peoples conquering other peoples, or
And
oppression, men oppressing women, and slaveries, and all these things, and poverty, so much suffering with that. And but there had to be a pocket somewhere, and you may not know when, but if you visualize that you've got at least one set of healthy ancestors that had harmony, that did not have trauma, that got along with each other, that nurtured and raised their children in a proper loving way, then that's in you. And you go back to there, then that's your resource. And so then that's what's going to come down the line to heal all the stuff that happened since then.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is a very good point. It's not just about looking at those things, but also how can we move forward even with all of that we've experienced or our family has experienced.
And then the other piece, you can also have a resource of the future. So I often do a thing, step, is it okay to now step forward? And you may have to step away from your family system into your own future. And often people are looking out the window and that sort of thing. And they are accelerating their growth into their own future if they can visualize it as something other than what it's been, something positive, or reaching their goals, or solving the problem, what have you. And so time is irrelevant. We're stepping into this place where the past and the future are right here, can be used. And it doesn't matter when it happened or if it, quote, didn't happen yet.
Do you have, because I know you have, how many years has it been since you started working with clients in any field?
Oh, well, at any capacity,
Mhm.
it would have been since I was 21. So, like, almost 40 years.
Yeah, so I
I mean,
would,
then it was doing testing and rehab, but yeah,
yeah, so
on and off.
I'd like to
Um,
know, because you've seen so many paths of people's lives and people who have been in really tough hardship. I'd like to know if you have any guidance for someone who might be going through something like that right now, or to
oh, sure.
hope, because you've seen, I'm sure, journeys of people who have walked through.
Let's see. Listen to those who will tell you that this won't last forever and that somehow you will find a way out and you will not always feel this way. And, you know, the sounds so pithy though. Never give up, but it's true. Don't. And and so for the person going through something, if something you do or try doesn't work, try the next thing.
Mm.
Or if you go to a counselor and you don't resonate with them, you're the customer, you're the consumer. You get to choose someone else. And it's not about judging them and don't worry about how they feel. They'll get another client. Um, you get to find what works for you, and something will,
Not
or
even
something
just
can.
that, but something that you mentioned earlier kind of came back to me was finding groups, even if it's not a spiritual thing, if it's not
Oh,
a
yeah,
therapy
groups.
kind of thing, just
Right.
with people like art.
Yes. So support groups are really powerful. Um, One testament to that is the 12-step groups, which started as Alcoholics Anonymous. They're all lay people. There's no, um, I mean, they might be, but there's no one in there that's gone to university to learn how to counsel someone else. Everyone there is living the addiction and tried to conquer it together. And they have a format. They've got the 12 steps of things they actually do. They have guidelines for how someone sponsors someone. But the crux of that is a place to safely tell your story with people who've experienced similar stories, and that's invaluable. So they have a phrase, I think it comes from there. All the really pithy statements come from 12 step. You're only as sick as your secrets. Have you ever heard that one?
My teacher told me that one.
Yeah, it's going around, but it's true. But then you don't have to tell just anyone. There's something called TMI, like too much sharing, oversharing, too much information. But but if you're in this room where everything is held confidential, everyone's promised to not repeat it outside the room, then you can share. Now, it's tricky. I find it's tricky with abuse because it can be triggering for someone to hear a hard story from someone else's abuse. So often that's not how they do that kind of support. But if they're staying in the now and saying, well, I had a really sad day today and I couldn't, I managed to get to this meeting, or yesterday I couldn't get out of bed at all. And everyone in the room says, I've been there too. And some people do the advice giving, this is what worked for me. But aside from the practical part, there's just the being heard.
That's what I love
There's
about
a
work is being heard and being held by
being seen.
yourself, right? With everybody.
Yeah,
And then also I notice representatives even take in so much from
absolutely.
somebody else's work. Sometimes that could be even more powerful. It's
Right.
it's
I
something
there's different formats. I don't know how you do groups and individual?
I do, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So when you do groups, um, do you have like the focus client versus the rep, and one's paying a different price, or is everybody the same, or
You know, facilitators, my teacher is one of them who you pay a higher price and you're guaranteed to work. The way I do it right now is everyone pays the same, and I go around and ask, and then I tune into who will cause the most transformation for everybody, or who is the most ready. So for me, it's kind of like I feel the bubble is already risen. Sometimes people will already start moving through the emotion unconsciously,
oh
and I
yes.
don't know they're ready. So I ask them to come sit, and then we work on their issue. Even if I don't know what the issue is, I just can kind of get a grasp by feeling into them. So for me, it's not you pay a price and then you get to do it. It's more like everybody all together.
Right.
And
I work the same way you do, but I have really thought about it, like to wrap my head around that. Or think, am I going to attract a bigger group if some people only have to pay the $10 or something? Um, but but there is a thing, it's not about the money, but there is something about having skin in the game.
well, they, yeah,
And
yeah, that's what my teacher says is you will value what you put into.
Right. Absolutely.
I've even had
So
where someone tells me I can't pay the full price, and I say we can pay whatever is equivalent for you for that amount of price. Does that make sense?
sure.
So like
Yeah, some
if
kind of like a
75,
sliding scale.
right? So if 75 to you is the same as 175 to somebody else, then that's relative
Hmm.
because it's more about how much are you willing to put
Right.
some skin in the game. So yeah, yeah,
In
yeah,
in New Zealand, in Maori culture, the indigenous culture here, they have a term called koha. Now, for them, it's sacred. So it's that there isn't a set price, and it translates in English as donation. But I find that Western people, when they hear it's donation, they just get away with paying as little as they possibly can without looking bad.
right.
And that's not the sacredness of it. So it's really that exchange and the justice, the fairness of it, but to really reflect on what you can do and what it's worth. So if people are coming and everyone's paid the same thing, then you're going to pay attention when you're repping or just observing. You don't actually ever have to stand up and rep. And somebody at some point in the day is going to have a similar issue to you. For example, I had so it was one of my regular clients, and he came to the Constellation, and he he chose not to do his own work there, but later, because I saw him the next week, he said he said, I got what I needed out of it. I said, yes, what's that? And he said, when the woman who was working said, oh wow, I feel really uncomfortable with all this attention on me. And her pattern had been to shirk from attention, or when she got attention, it was abusive in the past. And so she avoided it. And so him hearing her say that, and maybe he was ripping something in her system, um, he owned it. Oh, that's right. I was just talking about that last week, that sometimes I feel really uncomfortable, like I can't receive praise or what have you. And so his moment of growth was that right there as a rep. And so I make sure when I open the circle, everybody of course shares like who they are and that sort of thing. But um, what did you come here for? What do you want to be different here at 10 a.m. versus 4 p.m. when you leave here? And by stating it then, you're going to get some of that. You're going to get, you're either going to achieve it or you're going to get an opening toward it, or an insight about it, or something. And so everyone gets to say something about their own process of what they're intending, what they need. And so the reps benefit just not, I don't think just as much, but they benefit. And there's something about the container of the field. We're opening up something that somehow Bert Hellinger tapped into something really special. And being in this dedicated space to healing, um, with this clear intention and focus is potent. And so when somebody states, I want to feel more confident by the end of the day, well, it's working on them the whole time, and they're taking those energies of everyone's ancestors that we're accessing and all those other forces, because I use resources like forces of nature and so on.
Yeah, and I have noticed the groups that come together, it's like they were all meant to be there for that. Like I've noticed sometimes there's like a theme of everyone has like a sister thing or everybody has a
Yes,
daughter thing.
yes.
So I feel like, and also when I spoke to Gary Stewart, he was talking about someone who was grieving through a loss of a pet. And that specific day, someone walked in. He didn't even know what was going on. He just walked through the door with a German Shepherd, who the person lost the German Shepherd.
Oh, the
It's
same
so
kind of
perfect.
dog.
Right. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
incredible when you think about the kinds of people who were meant to be brought together and then what gets worked on that day. Have you
Oh,
had
yeah.
experiences like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so it's not to identify people, but there were So there's a lot of immigrants in New Zealand. So both of these women were immigrants from the same European country and not one of the larger ones. Um, yeah, and then those that country, both of their pieces of work fed into the trauma that country had experienced. Um, it's a place nobody gets out of without having experienced it because it was colonized and so on. But yeah, so that was pretty random. I mean, there's no such thing as random. So that was one of those kinds of synchronicities that that one had come from there 25 or 30 years ago and the other just 3 years ago. But they were raised there and I didn't expect that. I mean, you don't have any expectations what's going to show up.
I know that we're running short on time,
Sure.
10 more minutes, but I want to give you some time to maybe if you would like to give guidance for people who are just beginning learning about this work or something for facilitators,
Sure.
you'd like to share.
Um, I don't know what other people's experience is, but I went to a lot of constellations before I got to do the training. And I was always like, how do they know what to do next? How do they know what to say? And at first, I didn't even know the basic principles, like orders of love and what have you. But even when I knew some of that, and then even after I trained, if I watch someone else, I'm not inside them, and they're going to choose different things that I might. So you get to like, I can't do this. Like, I won't know what to say next. But what happens is when you step into the role of facilitator, you've just got to take a deep breath and jump off the high diving board. And like anything new, I've learned even psychotherapy techniques and so on. I just have to go for it and trust it, and it will unfold. Whatever happens is right. There's no wrong. There's no mistake. You may go back after and say, "Gosh, I would have done this differently." Well, you're learning. And so to trust yourself and trust the field and trust that and trust the client who showed up because their soul brought them there, not you. I mean, you in one way, you did the advertising, whatever, but their soul brought them there, and they came with their whole ancestry that wants them to heal and wants them to do work for their trauma and so on. And so you're just a channel for that. But and the fact that you have that kind of fear, like, it's my turn, that's normal. So don't think like you're going to see the people in the field that have been doing this for 25 years, the ones that learned from Bert Hellinger, and it's old news to them. It's going to work because it's worked for 25 years for them. But you don't have to don't judge that they might not have the same kind of moments of, uh-oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And that humility is a mark of mastery, of like a mastership, in that you can surrender and say, okay, what next? And you may or may not have moments of confusion, but but trust yourself. And the first time's always the hardest, and it gets easier over time. Leslie Nips, who's a facilitator in New Mexico, said, "Oh yes, learning constellations is easy, but mastering constellations is hard." And she's been doing it for 10 or 15 years.
Beautiful. Do you have anything coming up? Classes coming up? Do you do
Yes.
online?
So I have my next one day workshop is the 19th of October, and I'm in Kapiti Coast, which is north of Wellington in New Zealand. Um, so that's coming up real soon. I don't know when people will be watching this. And but then the one after that is the 1st of December. And those are live in person. I don't have anything set up group wise on virtual space on Zoom or what have you. Um,
What are
well,
your plans kind of going forward?
my plans, big plans. So I'm going to keep doing the regular. Oh, it's raining. Surprising. Rains a lot here. It's very green and it rains a lot. Um, and it's spring. It's supposed to be spring here, but half of spring has days that feel like it's winter here. So anyway, I'm distracted. Um, I'm going to keep doing the constellations for the public. I do them in a 1 day format. I would like to travel both around New Zealand and anywhere elsewhere in the world and do longer like weekends. Um, I was always jealous of the people like my my teacher Dan Cohen, who I first got introduced to it. At one point, I was reading his website and it said, "This is my 18th country to go and do constellations," and he started pre-Zoom, pre-COVID, when we just he didn't do them online. He did them locally, one-on-one, or traveled somewhere, and then now he does them online. But and then Shavasti, who's lives in London, I think he said, "I'm going to Egypt. It's a new country for me, and it's my 56th country." I'm like, that is amazing. Like, we'll work for travel, you know?
It's
So,
so
so
funny.
that
It's
that's
like
a goal for me. And I've gotten to go to a lot of places in my life with that and lived in a bunch of places. I never expected to be such a nomad, but that's exciting for me, meeting people from different cultures, experience different places. So I want to do that. I'm open on a much shorter notice to do it somewhere in New Zealand. The country's about, well, just speaking, it's 1,000 kilometers, like 600 miles from top to bottom. It's kind of long and narrow, spread out. So we've got a whole bunch of cities from very small to medium. Um, but there's a lot of places to go and everywhere is beautiful. So um,
where can people reach you or find you?
they can reach me at my website, which is www.larrymarkhonig, PhD.com.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that'll be in the notes below as well.
Oh,
So
good. There'll be
people can
notes. I
find you.
was thinking that you got to have that written for people.
I will do
Click
that. So
here.
it'll also be on the actual screen too. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
good. Well, it should be up in a day or two. I'm redoing my website and so I can be reached there. And my email address, well, it's going to change. We'll leave that. All the contact details will be there. And you can find me now. I've entered the space of let's see. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook. The page is Lightworks. And so far I've just been posting the these local workshops on there. I haven't done content yet. Um, So I'm on there, and then I'm gonna be all over everything else like YouTube and WhatsApp and TikTok and against my against my what is it? My resistance to all that stuff. I was telling my friend who's my age, um, yeah, we're not 30. I can't learn all this social media stuff. Maybe if I was 30, I came from like pre-computer, almost pre-computer. I did my undergraduate on a typewriter, and I won't explain to you what that is. You could go Google it. And so um anyway,
It
I've
is so
hired someone to help me with all that. And so I'm gonna have more of a presence. And I also want to help educate people. Um And this is a step. You've given me this opportunity to share a lot of my learnings and knowledge, and I know I've built up a good amount of that. And some people keep it real simple. They're not reading all the constellation books, but they do the constellations. Other people have devoured every shred of writing that's ever been done about it. and that's their style. However you go about it, it's going to work. I do want, before we close,
Mhm.
um, I want to say that I've dedicated this hour and a half to a friend of mine. Her name is Christine Hopkins, and she was in the 15-month training with me. And I had some really meaningful experiences with her in May in at our retreat in New York. Um, and she's currently in the process of leaving this world. She had gotten a sudden mysterious illness and became paralyzed, and then we're all together on this WhatsApp and we're following her bits of news about her diagnosis and this and that. Then I hadn't heard about from her or someone else about what she's going through for some number of weeks. And then just today I read that she's on life support and her brother managed to get there. She lives in Maryland. And I just, I believe maybe now her real work will begin. But she was a psychotherapist. She had a master's in dance therapy and worked as a psychotherapist. And then she was also a professional drummer. She had a band and was trying to recover to then be in a show with them. And yeah, so she's present. And there's this 24-hour prayer vigil going on. And but like I said before, no one knows what their fate is. And we have to see that that is just the next journey. And so it the fact that her illness cut her life, she's in her 60s. So I say cut short her life, um, doesn't mean doesn't mean that healing didn't happen. And I witnessed some of her personal growth in the constellation space. And then she had recently been to Peru with shaman. So everything happens for reasons beyond our knowing. But sometimes our heart goes out to all the trauma and suffering of individuals and groups of people and nations in the world. Oh, our heart should go out.
Yeah. I want to say thank you for still coming even after.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
well,
That
yeah.
means
I
like,
mean, it wasn't, I only met her then, like in that 4 day time, because the training was in two separate groups. And actually, it was in one experience with her, but she was a rep for me. So I didn't know her very well at all, but I was following her sharing with our group about this sudden illness and everything. And um, but the experiences I had because they were in that constellation space were powerful, more
it really
than
connects you to
than
people.
someone I might know one time in a much more mundane space. So, but um, but I thought, well, what better way to honor her journey than have this initiation or inauguration of being online here.
Yeah. And I want to say I'm so excited to see what you do and what you contribute to the world with all of your background and knowledge up to this point. So thank you so much for letting me
Thank
be
you.
this one. That's so exciting.
Oh, thank you. Where do you live? I
I'm in
didn't.
California. Uh,
Yeah, what city?
most of my time is spent in Orange County,
Oh,
majority
sure.
Laguna Beach. Something else
Okay.
I do for work is working with animals, and so a lot of my clients.
Oh, yes. So I'm going to be joining with a friend here, it's the village next door to mine, who works with horses and constellations. So she's an equine
I think
therapist,
I
Jenny
have seen
Gibson.
her on the Facebook group. I think I've seen her
Yes.
talking about it. Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
she's one of the founding members of ANSCI, Aotearoa New Zealand Constellation Incorporated. They have a web page. So there's an annual conference in April here in New Zealand. You're welcome to come. I know New Zealand's on everyone's bucket list, but we've got a proposal in the works to get the government to pay for the trauma victims to do a 1 day workshop where the horses are also the representatives. And she's also trained in indigenous healing, Maori medicine,
I would
and
love to have a conversation
everything.
with her. Yeah, yeah.
I
So
will I will
No.
send your name to
Yeah.
her because I'm sure she would love to do this too.
I would love to hear her stories
We've
about
got a nice
that.
network of people now in New Zealand.
Yeah.
There weren't too many like 10 years ago when I got here, but now there's quite a lot of people trained.
That's interesting because I know Bert Hellinger was actually he went and learned from Maori people or from that.
Oh, he was here?
Well, I
I
know
never
he,
heard that. I
yes,
don't
he was.
know.
I know he was interested in Maori teachings. I don't know if he was in New Zealand actually. I know
I
he,
don't think he visited here because someone would have said so.
but I
Um,
heard that he's learned from about Maori or
well,
some.
I'm sure. I mean, his foundation was with the Zulu,
Hmm.
and so that whole indigenous culture.
Right.
Um, I do know Mark, I think it was Mark Reddy. He's passed on now, but he would come to New Zealand and do work here, and he trained some of the people I've worked with. And it fits the culture perfectly. You don't have to explain anything about the ancestors being real. They are real.
Oh, they are very real. Yes.
They are real. But to Maori, like, what do you mean they're not real?
Right.
What do
Yeah.
you mean that plants don't speak to you? And I mean, people that are immersed in it, not everyone is connected to it, but everything is spirit. Wairua, they call it. Everything is spirit. Everything is energy, and everything deserves that reverence and can assist you.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's beautiful to end here with.
Hmm.
Once again, thank you so much again, Larry. I would love to keep in contact. Um,
Certainly.
Again, I think this was a really good conversation, a lot of really good points here, and I'm excited to release this. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. I'm really glad to have been able
Awesome.
to do this.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye,
Um,
everyone.